people who work with software products, digital products, as product owners and as team members, as stakeholders, we're so concerned with the details, the user stories, the user interface design, the user interaction design, architecture, technologies, testing, test scripts, integration issues, that we sometimes lose sight of the big picture, and we sometimes lose sight of where we want to take our product and why we're doing what we're doing. And so what I then find very helpful is to stop and reflect. Now, I do think that attention to detail is important to build a successful product, to build a product that the users want. But if we worry so much about the solution, if we worry so much about user stories and requirements and functionality and so much about code and tests, that we kind of forget who the users are and why they want to use our product in the first place, then I think we're in danger of creating a product that isn't particularly helpful and beneficial for the users and customers. So the number of techniques that I'd like to share with you today, and the first one is really all about creating a vision and a strategy and describing that vision and that product strategy. Now, vision and strategy means different things to different people. Those are just terms and concepts. So I thought I'd share my understanding, my take on what a product vision is and what a product strategy is. And in order to do so, I'd like to use a little structure, a little template that I've developed. But this is not about a specific template or structure. So if the template resonates with you, if you like it, that's great. If you do not like it, that's also great. So this is just so I can describe what do I mean by vision and what do I mean by strategy. The little structure here is called the product vision board. I don't know, maybe some of you might have seen it before. And as you can tell, it contains 5 sections. There is a big dark section at the top that runs horizontally, and then there are 4 sections underneath that are aligned vertically. Now, the section at the top is where I describe the vision. Now, what is the vision? In my mind, the vision should describe the purpose of the product, the reason why the product exists, the ultimate goal that you want to achieve with your product. And you may want to describe it in such a way, formulate it in such a way that it captures the positive change that your product should create. Now, that may sound all a little bit abstract, so let me give you an example. Say I want to develop a mobile app that helps people become more aware of what they eat and how much they eat and when they eat and possibly drink. Then the vision behind this product or for such a product could be healthy eating or help people eat more healthily. So you can see I quite like to work with a big vision. I find a big vision tends to be more inclusive. It tends to be easier for the development team and the stakeholders then to buy into the vision and support the vision. And that's what the vision is all about. It's really all about creating some fundamental alignments and some fundamental motivation for working on the product, for providing a product, for marketing and selling a product. So a key quality of the vision should be that it's a shared vision, that it's not only your vision, but also that the development members and the stakeholders find the vision meaningful and understand the vision. And then I quite like to keep the vision short and focused, short and sweet, in order to make it memorable. So I've found over the years that a slogan works really well to capture the vision. So big vision, but concise, and ideally it should be inspiring in the sense that it provides some basic motivation, and not only for the development team members and the stakeholders, but equally for you. I find that the vision helps me decide which products to work on and if I should work on a product or not. And looking back, I realized that over the years I've worked on some products whose vision didn't resonate with me. And in hindsight, I probably didn't do as good a job on those products as I could have and should have done. So I think it's important also to look for, in a way, personal alignment between you and the product and between the vision of the product, what you want to achieve ultimately with your product and what you think is meaningful, so that it's worthwhile for you to dedicate time and energy to progressing this product. So that's the vision, and while I find the vision very helpful and would encourage those of you who currently don't have a vision for their product or not quite sure what the vision is, that maybe you consider creating a vision, or you consider I don't know, finding out what the vision might be. I don't think it's enough in order to be clear what needs to be done to build a product that users really want. I think we need more, and this is where, in my mind, the product strategy comes in. And the product strategy here in the specific structure is described in those 4 white boxes. And let's start going from left to right. The first key element of a product strategy, in my mind, is the target group. And the target group describes the market or market segment that you want to address with your product. So the users and the customers, the people who should employ your product, use your product, or pay for your product in one way or another, if they are customers. So the question here is, who are the beneficiaries? Who are the beneficiaries of your product? And then is it a market or market segment that you already serve, that you know, that you're familiar with? Or is it maybe a new market, a market that you haven't served? Or maybe even, in case of a disruptive innovation, a market that you're about to create? And what I would suggest is that you describe the beneficiaries of your product, the users and customers, so that you can tell if somebody is part of your target group or not. So a common mistake I see people is that they choose a very big and a very heterogeneous and a very woolly target group. But I quite like the suggestion that Steve Blank made in one of his books. I think he wrote, develop a product for the few, not the many. And I find that's a very good strategy, particularly for brand new products, but also when you want to make bigger changes to an existing product, say take it to a new market or market segment in order to extend its life cycle and make it attractive again. And so often it's beneficial to start with a smaller focused target group and then do a good job for those individuals, and then incrementally extend the group. So those are the users and customers. What about their needs? Well, that's what the next section is all about. And by needs, I mean, what is the primary problem that the product solves? So some of you may have used a mapping product like Google Maps or Apple Maps this morning to find the conference venue. Now, those products probably are problem-solving offerings, assets. They help you get from A to B. Solve the problem to get from A to B for you. But maybe your product is more a benefit generating one. Think of a product like Snapchat or Twitter or WhatsApp. Those products help you stay in touch with family and friends. So they offer the benefit of communicating with people and staying in touch with people. So whatever it is, I think it's very important to be clear what is the primary need, what is the primary job that your product should address, that your product should allow your users to do, or what is the main user goal that your product supports. All those terms and concepts I find can be used largely interchangeably in order to describe here the needs and the value proposition of your product. Again, fundamental question is why would anybody bother with your product? What's in it for the users? What's in it for the customers? Why should people use your product? And then the next section talks about the product itself. What kind of product is it? Is it a mobile app? Is it a web app? Is it software only? Is there firmware, hardware, and are there additional elements to the product? And then what makes it special? What makes it stand out? Why should anybody choose your product over competing offerings, over alternative products that are provided by competitors? Think, for instance, of the Google Chrome browser, which just, I believe, turned 10 years old. The original standout features of the Google Chrome browser were simplicity, speed, and safety. So, what I'm after here is 3 to 5 key features, delighters, wow features, in the sense of the Kano model, but not a long product backlog list. So a common mistake here is that people turn the section into a mini product backlog. But at this stage, you shouldn't worry about detailed requirements. They come later, and I'll talk about this in a little while. And then finally, is the product feasible? is it feasible to develop the product? Not only in terms of do the technologies exist, but do you have enough people with the right skills? And if not, can you upskill people in time, or can you acquire the necessary skills? Can you hire people, or can you employ the right people? And then the last element here, last but not least, are the business goals. And those are really the business benefits that your product should generate. How is the product going to benefit your company is the question here. Is your product generating revenue, as in the case of the product that I'm using right now to show you the structure here. It's Microsoft PowerPoint, part of the Office suite, one of the major cash cows of Microsoft. Or is it maybe, does your product indirectly generate revenue? Think of an online retailer's website like Amazon.com, for instance. You know, that's essentially a sales channel, and it helps then sell revenue-generating products. Or is it more a product that reduces cost and enhances productivity, like a traditional IT application, for instance? Or maybe your product helps develop the brand. Think of, say, the Toyota Prius. You know, that helped Toyota develop its brand and become a perceivedly or supposedly green car company, yeah? Producing environmentally friendly cars. So whatever it is, I think it's important to understand what is the value that your product creates for the users, but here also equally for the business. And so I very much look at products as revenue generating vehicles. A product must generate enough value for the users, and it must also generate enough value for the business. And what I would suggest is that you consider stating specific targets. So drawing a line in the sand, so to speak, and for instance, stating revenue targets if your product is a revenue generating asset. I know that can be difficult, but the challenge when you don't state any targets is that you don't have anything to aim for, and it's difficult to track progress. And you don't know how well you're doing, and you don't know how well your product is doing. You can't really determine, or you can't easily determine the product performance. The same is true with the needs, by the way, and make sure that your needs, the main problem or the primary benefit, are specific, so that you can measure. So the needs and the business goals, they should be measurable, they should be specific, so you can then select the right metrics, the right key performance indicators in order to track the product performance and see how your product is doing and if the strategy is working or not. So a very simple structure, a few simple questions, but I find those questions aren't always easy to answer. And strategy is important for brand new products, but it's equally important for older products. So, I would encourage you that if you're unclear what the vision of your product is, if you're not quite sure what the strategy is, that you get together and product owner, development team members and key stakeholders, and you answer those questions together to make sure there's a shared understanding, and through that shared understanding, an alignment and a basis for collaboration. So are there any questions at this stage? Are you still with me, or are you getting bored and falling asleep? I can see them, yeah. Are there any questions at this stage? No questions, good, okay, cool. Then I'll continue a little bit. So let's put the strategy in context. Oh, I forgot to say, if you want to download this little template, you can download it for free at my website. But don't worry too much about the structure, the template. Again, it's not about the template. It's really about asking the right questions and answering those questions in a meaningful way. So strategy in context, that's what I wanted to talk about. The strategy, in my mind, has an important place when it comes to product planning and product management. So I quite like to start with the vision, similarly to what I've just sketched out. And just to remind you, vision is overarching goal of your product, the ultimate purpose. And in terms of a horizon, a planning horizon, I like to keep the vision so big that it can cover the next 5 years, about the next 5 years. So allowing the vision to provide continued guidance. Yeah. So the vision should be stable, even if the strategy and the roadmap and the product backlog change. And then the next step for me would be to derive the strategy. So again, it's the path towards your vision, towards the overarching goal. And your product strategy essentially wants to communicate how to achieve product success, how to make your product successful or keep it successful. What is the value your product should create for the users, and what is the value your product should create for the business. And in terms of the planning horizon, how long should the product strategy be valid? Well, it depends. Typically for a life cycle stage. So if you're building a brand new product, then build a product strategy to be able to launch and address the early markets, the innovators. And then after launch, rework your strategy in order to achieve product market fit and address the early majority and get into the growth stage. But as important as I find a product strategy is, it's not sufficient. It's kind of nice to describe the overall path. It's equally beneficial to add more details and say what are some milestones along the way. How is our product likely to evolve over the next, say, 12 months? And what are some maybe sub goals that we can meet? And this is where then the product roadmap comes in. So the product roadmap for me should be an actionable plan based on your product strategy, derived from your product strategy, and essentially describe the journey you want to take your product on. So say that I want to spend the summer holiday with my family in southern Spain. That'd be the strategy is to drive, to go on a road trip. Now I live in the UK. And driving from the UK to southern Spain is, takes a while. It's quite a distance. So it probably would be good to do a little bit of road mapping and think about what are the options for the road trip, which highways, which motorways should be used, what are stopover points. We probably need to book a hotel and stay over. Driving from the UK to southern Spain in one day probably would be too much. And I'd suggest you do exactly the same thing for your product, that based on the strategy, you think, okay, what are some major points, some major milestones and goals that you can achieve over the next 6 to 12 months? What can you do in the next 2 to 3 months, and then the subsequent 2 to 3 months and so forth. Yeah. And with a product roadmap in place, in my mind, you're in a good position then to derive your product backlog and stock your product backlog that then contains all the details, including the user stories and user interface designs, and maybe some sequence diagrams or workflow diagrams and other helpful artifacts. And so what this model is trying to ensure is that the user stories that you identify and that you capture in your product backlog are in line essentially with the product strategy and the vision. And that the vision and the product strategy open up the context for, again, then making the right detailed decisions. I mean, it's impossible to write the right user stories if you don't know who the users are. It's impossible to get the user stories right if you don't know what is the main problem that your product should address or what is the primary benefit that it should offer, right? So again, for me, a good reason why it's worthwhile to spend enough time on product strategy. So again, any questions at this stage?
We are getting here now the structure to be able to hear ourselves and to talk to you, and you can hear us. So we need like 2 steps, okay? So we are thinking about switching into questions, because as you can see, it's very difficult to have the slides on the screens. Maybe you have already seen some of the resources that Roman has created. Anyone has a question for Roman that would like an answer? Okay, we have questions, right? Oh, again, a screen. So let's go for some questions, yeah? I would like to know, Roman, because I have heard you before, you mentioned sometime that you recommend to avoid big marketing and user research at the beginning, but this is quite generic, right? when we have a team, when we have a product team with a lot of technical depth and experience depth, what means big or how big the research needs to be? What would you recommend to that team?
No, I'm sorry. There was too much echo and distortion. So, can you see? I'll try and share my slides with you in order to answer that question. Can you see the slides, or can you see a slide? Can you see my slide? Okay, cool, brilliant. So yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for asking that question. How can we avoid big upfront market research and make our ultimately innovation process very heavyweight? In an agile context where we assume there's complexity, there's uncertainty, where often being fast and learning quickly is a competitive advantage. I think we'd like to avoid that. We'd like to be quite lean and lightweight. Now, a great way to do this, in my experience, is to adopt a process for discovery and strategy creation and validation and research that is based on lean startup. So the lean startup idea is that you basically start with what you know. Now, that assumes that you have sufficient knowledge of your target markets, the users and customers, that you can create a strategy, a meaningful strategy. Whenever you're entering a brand new market, whenever you enter a new market, that's not the case. And then often you do need to do a little bit of upfront research. But I'd suggest you keep it to the bare minimum. So, the goal should be to have, be able to clearly describe who do you believe are the users, why do you believe the users would want to use the product, what's the main problem or the primary benefit, what are the 3 to 5 standout features, and what are the top 1 to 3 business goals. So, if you have to do any upfront research, then no more in order to be able to answer those questions. And then what Lean Startup suggests is essentially to iterate over your initial strategy and test it and correct it. And so the way I like to describe this is to say by choosing the biggest risk, the uncertainty that you must address now in order to avoid making the wrong decisions and taking your product down the wrong path. And then deciding how to address the risk. And depending on where the risk is, say if the risk is around the users, then you may want to choose observation, direct observation, or problem interviews in order to make sure that you've selected the right target group. Yeah. And then you go and you carry out your risk mitigation techniques, your validation, your research techniques. And so you implement the measure and you gather the data, you carry out the interviews, you observe people, for instance, and then you decide what to do. And typically you've got 3 main options. The first one is to persevere. And that means, well, your strategy, generally speaking, looks all right. It just needs to be refined. It just needs to be adjusted, enhanced. Maybe the value proposition, the needs aren't quite specific enough. Maybe you need to adjust the target group, the users, so smaller changes. But it could also be that you found out that the strategy is not working. It's wrong. And that's quite normal. That's perfectly okay. And that would be then and that you may then want to decide to change your strategy. So if I want to build a mobile app that helps people eat more healthily, and I find that maybe there is no significant demand for such a mobile app, maybe the market is saturated, maybe tech products don't really help people to make sustained changes in their life, then I could consider pursuing alternative strategies, such as writing a book on healthy eating, or running healthy eating or mindful eating workshops. And those will be alternative strategies, and that will be called a pivot. So I could pivot, but it's important for me that, you know, part of that process of starting with an initial strategy and refining and reworking and correcting is the necessity to be able to fail and be willing to fail. And the same is in terms of a pivot, but also in terms of stopping and in a way saying, well, you know, we've worked on this now for a little while. Maybe we've worked on this now for a few weeks. Maybe we've pivoted, but we still can't find a strategy that seems to work. Maybe we should just stop and walk away. Yeah. So the my recommendation really is, again, to be willing and open to failure on a personal level. I can find it very hard to admit mistakes and go through a failure experience, and you know, sometimes I try and avoid failure and in a way cheat a little bit. You know, just be open to failure, not be too attached to your ideas, not to cling to your ideas, not to identify yourself through ideas and in a way success. And then from an organizational perspective, create a fail-safe environment, or have a fail-safe environment where it's okay to fail, where it's okay to make a mistake at this stage, where it's okay to experiment, to try things out and to learn. I mean, whenever we do something new, there is uncertainty. Whenever we are doing something new, we have to experiment, and we have to be able to make mistakes. Otherwise, we can't learn. And then in terms of how long do you need in order to validate the strategy? Well, it'll depend on the type of innovation we're dealing with and the amount of risks that we have. And if you don't know, then I would suggest that you time box the validation, or some people like to talk about product discovery, the product discovery work, to a month, and divide it into 4 one-week sub-iterations or iterations. And at the end of each one-week iteration, you get together, the product owner, development team, and key stakeholders, and you look at how the product strategy has changed, and then decide what to do. Continue, persevere, pivot, drastic change, or stop. So that was a long answer. Sorry.
We have another question for Roman. The question is, how do you measure the maturity of a product organization?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It's a great question, and it's a question that's not easy to answer. So I can tell you the factors that I use to assess product maturity. One of the factors is really the knowledge and the skills of the people, the product people in the organization. You know, with regards to strategic topic around product strategy, product roadmap, business model, with regards to more tactical aspects, say personas, product backlog, some user experience elements, maybe user stories, those techniques. And then leadership aspects, the ability to choose the right leadership style, to communicate empathetically, and to be able to listen, to be able to collaborate in the right way with the development team and engage the stakeholders in the right way, to be open and transparent and act with integrity. So those will be the personal elements, and then more organizational elements around, is there an established product management group, and where does the product management group sit on the org chart within the organization? What about an innovation process? You know, does the organization, do people use, is there a product strategy process in place? Is there portfolio management
right, guys. Thank you so much for coming. Sorry for the connection inconveniences. So thank you.